There are some things that go bump in the night that can't be explained away with fancy technology or logical reasoning. Sometimes the most terrifying hauntings are those where we don't know what we're dealing with. Here are a few unexplained horror mysteries from around the world that may just have something to do with phantom voices. Now you're going to want to sit down for this first one. The devil may have had a hand in this tragic tale. On December 19th, 1923, 4 miners were making their way through the mines near the town of Rugby in New South Wales, Australia. Their names were John Dalziel, Oliver Bennett, Arthur Holland, and William Henry Wade. They were all close friends and had been working at the mine for a long time. This particular day was like any other. As they made their way through the dark tunnels, they began to hear strange music coming from somewhere up ahead. The men described it as a waltz, but as the tune seemed to draw closer, it changed to the sound of screams and moans. Then suddenly, the music stopped. Realizing that they were hearing this strange music for the 3rd time that week, the men decided to turn around and head back. That was when they heard footsteps behind them. I was running frantically. They tried to outrun whatever was chasing them. When they finally burst out of the mine, they were so scared that they didn't stop running until they got home. The next morning, the men told their story to the police and their worried wives. It was assumed that these sounds they heard in the mine were an omen, but nothing could have prepared them for what happened next. While they were still talking about the music, another miner entered the room and announced that there had been a cave-in. The 4 men went back into the mine. And while they were able to rescue 2 of the miners, they found the bodies of Bennett and Wade. They were both kneeling like they were praying. An investigation revealed that the wall had collapsed above them while they were sitting on a ledge. So why did the 2 men kneel before their death? Some think it may have been the music they heard drawing them to the ledge, while others believe that it was simply the way they sat to rest. However, it's also possible that there is something more sinister at play. Like perhaps the devil himself took notice of the men's conversation and wanted to make good on his promise to take a couple of souls with him to hell. Our next story is one that has a more scientific explanation, but some people aren't convinced. Residents of a small village in western Turkey began to hear the sound of screaming children coming from inside an abandoned house. Nobody had lived in the building for more than 50 years, and yet the sounds of laughter and shrieks continued. The local townspeople became terrified and believed that ghosts were living inside the house. When they told paranormal investigators Gökhan, Absi, and Ibrahim Dinler about the noises, they went inside the home to see if they could find the source. After investigating, they discovered that the sounds were coming from a hole in the floor beneath a pile of trash. When they looked further into the hole, they saw several pairs of little shoes lining the sides. Thinking that maybe the shoes belonged to children who lived in the home before it was abandoned, they pulled them out and placed them side by side. The next day, however, they returned to find that the shoes had moved. Soon after, the Turkish press picked up the story and labeled it the Ghost House Mystery. Many people came forward claiming that they, too, had heard the sounds of children's voices. But in the end, AFC and Dilek were able to explain the mystery away. There was a family living in a house behind the one that was supposedly haunted. And every time the father beat his children, the sound traveled through the hollow floorboards of the abandoned house and echoed in such a way as to sound like the shrieks and giggles of ghosts. For our next story, we travel over to England to hear the tale of the Brown Lady, between the years of 1891 and 1939. Raymond and Dorothy Greenwood were the caretakers of Rainham Hall in Norfolk, England. One evening, while they were sitting in their home, they heard what sounded like the dragging of a heavy chain. At first they thought that maybe a dog had gotten loose in the hallway outside their door, but when they opened it, they saw no one. When they walked out to investigate, they heard the sound again, along with what sounded like chains dragging metal moans. The Greenwoods were so frightened that they fled to London. When the new caretaker moved in, he, too, heard the sound of chains dragging. He and many others who followed saw the apparition of a woman in Victorian clothing. She was always seen dragging herself along the floor. After much research, it was discovered that the ghost was most likely Lady Dorothy Walpole, who died in 1544. Her husband had her locked up in the Tower of London for witchcraft. It's believed that she haunts the halls of the tower even today, looking for her freedom. In the town of Belper, in Derbyshire, England, there is a bridge that crosses over the River Derwent. People who walk across the bridge often report hearing the sound of singing coming from above them. The strange thing is, there is nobody there. Many believe that the singing comes from the spirits of people who used to live in a mill that stood where the bridge now stands. The mill burned down in 1861, and people who knew the workers claimed that they were so distraught over the loss of their jobs that they jumped off the bridge and into the river. The idea that the workers ended their lives gives us an eerie explanation for the singing, but there's another theory. Some believe that the workers were never in the river at all. Instead, they took their own lives by jumping off the top of the mill. If this is true, then their souls are most likely trapped within the mill and not at the bottom of the river. Either way, you may want to stay away from this bridge if you do and want to hear some depressing singing. The town of Galena in Illinois is a beautiful place full of rich history. Built in the early 1800s, the town flourished because of its abundance of lead and zinc. It attracted European immigrants who worked in the mines, but it was also attractive to criminals who targeted the workers. In the 1860s, there were frequent gang wars between the Irish and Scottish gangs. And in 1867, a group of armed robbers killed 7 miners and stole their valuables. Since then, there have been reports of 7 men who have died violently in the area. They say that if you walk past the old jail on the corner of 13th and Washington Streets, you might hear the phantom voices of the dead men calling out for help. Maybe it's best to stick to walking down the road instead of cutting through the jail. If you've ever visited Savannah, Georgia, you may have heard the story of the Moon River. Legend has it that the river sings. Apparently, if you stand on a boat at the edge of the river at midnight and listen closely, you may hear the faint strains of piano music floating across the water. Some say the song is a lullaby that was played by a man who drowned his child in the river. Others claim that it's the ghost of a woman who drowned after being rejected by her lover. The truth is, we may never know what's playing that sad tune, but it's probably best not to stick around long enough to find out. Have you ever heard a voice that you're almost certain didn't come from anyone around you? Let me know your stories in the comments below, and thank you for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for more videos like these. See you next time. Bye.